Hello, children. I welcome you back to this portal of e learning. I hope you are doing well, taking a very good care of yourself and your family. For today's topic, we'll begin with a quotation. I would like you all to think about it. That says, the key to the cause of a certain fear or a phobia is the same as the key to conquer it. All we have to fear is fear itself. I would like you to think about the fear or the phobia if you have of any sort. And if you observe minutely the condition or your story, so it's not about the fear that you had or the fear you have right now. And it's not also about how you conquered it or are trying to conquer it. It's all about that transition period. It's all about that phase that you go through or you're going through right now. And that transition phase is the experience of life. And it is so vital because you're not going to be the same person anymore. So, the quotation is well justified, and to justify it further, we'll discuss in detail the topic of the day, the next chapter in your literature entitled as Deep Water. Deep Water, it has been penned down by William Douglas, who is also called as William Orwell Douglas. We'll discuss about the writer, the author first. William Orwell Douglas. He was an American jurist and Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. He was born in Maine. He retired in 1975 with a term lasting 36 years, and he remains the longest serving justice in the history of the court. Few more facts about him. He was also one of the most liberal and activist justices of the US Supreme Court and a vigorous and a controversial writer as well. William Orwell Douglas, he was born on October 16, 1898 in Maine, where his father, a Nova Scotian missionary, had moved as an itinerant preacher. At a young age of 4, William was stricken with polio, and to strengthen his spindly legs, he began the hiking. So right from childhood, he did not have that let-go attitude. And later the mountain climbing, that became one of his characteristic signatures later. When he was 6, his father died, leaving his mother and the 3 children to make their way on very little. So they moved in with relatives in Yakima, Washington. William Orwell Douglas is also known as an indomitable traveler, naturalist, mountain climber that we already had discussed about, a lecturer, and a writer, as well as teacher, administrator, and judge. Douglas reasserted the possibility of a many-faceted Renaissance existence as against a specialized, limited life. His career covered 4 decades of stormy American experience, from the early New Deal days, about that you can research, you can study, to the tensions of the Vietnam War, and also the student confrontations that happened in the late 1960s and early 1970s. He brought to these years of turmoil legal and financial skills, a passion for individual freedom, and a plain-spoken briskness. He will be remembered as one of the few public figures who actually dared challenge convention and establishment during the middle of 20th century. And this prominent figure died on January 19, 1980. Now the present story, it is an excerpt that has been taken from of men and mountains that he has penned down. It reveals how, as a young boy, William Douglas nearly drowned in a swimming pool. This episode caused him to fear water and he became hydrophobic. In this essay, he talks about this fear of water and thereafter how he finally overcame it. So it's his personal experience that he has spent on in form of an essay. Before we begin, we'll discuss about the important expressions that are given in the beginning of the chapter. The first is trachearis, that means deceitful. Subdued my pride, that means restrained, controlled my feeling of self-worth. Flailed at the surface. This expression means lashed or hit at the surface of the water. Fishing for landlocked salmon. Ocean fish trapped in inland lakes. Misadventure and accident. Bob to the surface like a cock. That means come up to the surface like a buoyant cock. Curtain of life fell. That here means not the death, became oblivious of reality around, or became unconscious. Back and forth across the pool. That means to and fro from one side of the pool to other. You can always go back reading the expressions for a better understanding of the chapter. Now let us begin with the story. I have divided the story in headings and subheadings further. This will help you out not only writing the answers to the questions pertaining, but also to create your short notes about the story, and it will also develop a better understanding of it. The first title is The First Ordeal. Here, William Douglas, he recalls his first ordeal in water as a barely 3 or 4-year-old child when his father had taken him to the beach in California. As he clung on to his father in the surf, the waves had knocked him down and swept over him. He had felt suffocated and frightened, and that fear clung him tightly. The second nightmare. After this particular incident, the second nightmare was when he was about 10 years old. He had then decided to learn to swim in a swimming pool at the YMCA in Yakima. YMCA stands for Young Men's Christian Association Pool. Unlike the Yakima River, which was unpredictable, the pool was safe. At least that's what he thought. It was barely 2 or 3 feet deep at the shallow end and 9 feet deep at the other. He got a pair of wings, the water wings, and went to the pool. The pool reminded him of his horrible experience in water, but he regained his confidence by aping other boys after a few days. But this renewed confidence was soon shattered when a strong boy about 18 years old picked him up and threw him into the deep end. The next header is experience. Caught unaware, he was a little frightened. Before he realized, he found himself in water, in a sitting position, swallowing water. Nevertheless, as he was being hurled into the water, he decided to make a big jump, come to the surface, lie float on it, and pedal to the edge of the pool. So he had a plan. But the fall seemed unending. The 9 feet were more like 90, and before he landed on the bottom, his lungs were ready to burst. As soon as his feet hit bottom, he tried to jump. Much to his surprise and disappointment, he came up slowly. He opened his eyes and saw only water and water. He felt terrified and suffocated too. He tried to scream, but no sound came out as his mouth was still under water. He tried to thrash his legs so that he could come to the surface of water, but they seemed to hang as dead weight against the body, refusing to move at all. He again sank back to the bottom of the pool. Breathless, he hit at the water with all his strength. His lungs and head ached and he began feeling dizzy. He remembered the strategy well. He had to spring up to the surface, lie flat on the water, strike out with his arms and legs, and get to the edge of the pool and to be safe. But when he went down yet again, there was nothing but water. And then he was awfully terrified. He tried to scream underwater, but he was paralyzed with the fear. Now suddenly he saw certain hope. He saw a reason. Once again he attempted to jump when they hit the bottom, but it made no difference. He was still in the water. He groped around but felt only water around. He felt even more terrorized, petrified, and his limbs refused to move. He tried to call for help, but nothing happened. Then, strangely, he saw light. While he resigned to his fate and stopped making effort, his eyes and nose were almost out. But this was short lived. As for the third time, he was being pulled down. And there was actually nobody who was pulling him down, it was the fear only. This time he resigned himself to his fate and stopped making an effort. He felt blackness sweep over his brain, and all seemed quiet and peaceful. He felt drowsy. When he regained consciousness, he was lying on his stomach beside the pool and was vomiting. He heard the boy who had thrown him into the water saying that he was just fooling around. He also heard that he had nearly died. Several hours later, he walked home feeling very weak and trembling. He wept in his bed. He cried bitterly. He could not eat anything that night. For days he was terrified. Consequently, he avoided water whenever he could. Now, years later, so few years later, he heard of waters of the Cascades and he actually wanted to explore that, though the fear was already there. It had always been there. He waded the Titan or bumping river and bathed in warm lake of the goat rocks, but the memory of the pool always came back to torment him. As a result, he could never enjoy fishing, canoeing, boating, swimming, all the water sports. One October, he was determined to learn swimming. He decided to get an instructor. He practiced swimming in a pool for 5 days a week, an hour each day. The instructor he used to put a belt around him and attached a rope to the belt that went through a pulley that ran on an overhead cable. He held on to the end of the rope as he swam. This trick worked to an extent, but fear never left him. 3 months later, he felt a little relaxed. He had learned to exhale underwater and to raise his nose and inhale. He practiced that hundreds of times. Gradually, the fear of putting his head underwater left him. The instructor then taught him to kick with legs in water. At first, his legs seemed stiff, but slowly they relaxed, and finally he developed complete control over him. Thus, bit by bit, the instructor created a swimmer. He could swim the length of the pool. The instructor had done a good job. Despite that, he was still not confident and wondered if he would be terror stricken when he was alone in the pool, because the memories still haunt him. He tried swimming alone, but the memories of the accident floated back to haunt him. He tried to confront his terror. He tried to confront it every time. He had still not conquered his fear, but it had to go. This is the last heading of the chapter, the gone fear. So, what actually he did at the end to conquer his fear? He went to Lake Wentworth in New Hampshire, dived off a dock at Triggs Island, and swam 2 miles across the lake to Stamp Act Island. Just once in the middle of the lake, he felt scared. He was too scared even. But he swam on. To reassure himself that he had got over his fear, he went up to the Titan, that is also called as to the Conrad Meadows, and up to the Conrad Creek Trail to Meade Glacier, and camped in the high meadow by the side of Warm Lake. The next morning, he swam across to the other shore and back. He was then certain that he had conquered his fear of water. But did it actually happen? He needed certain kind of a reassurance, and that was actually needed. Douglas felt that only those who have known terror and conquered it can understand how he felt. When one dies, one finds peace. But in terror, there is only and only the fear of death. He recalls Roosevelt's statement even. He recalls it that one must only be afraid of fear itself. So Douglas experienced both the feeling of dying and the horror that fear of it can produce. His determination to live grew even stronger. Thereafter, of course, and after conquering the fear that had gripped him so tightly all these years, he felt absolutely free. So now he was a free soul. Here are some pictures for your reference of the 3 places we talked about: the Triggs Island, Titan, that's also called as Conrad Meadows, and the last one, that is Meade Glacier. This is all about the chapter, and we'll revise it quickly one more time. This is a mind map that I have prepared, including only the important headings. Let us begin it. I'll try to be a little slow so that you can go back to the lesson. Prepare your notes well. Okay, let us begin the mind map of the lesson with the first heading, recounting the experiences. 2 experiences made the writer terrified of water. As a child of 3 or 4, he had gone with his father to a beach in California. They had been surfing and the waves knocked him down and swept over him. He remembered having felt buried in water and was gasping for breath. Later, when he was 10 or 11 years old at the YMCA pool in Yakima, he was pushed into the pool by an older child. He had been saved from drowning, but the experience had petrified him. The writer planned to overcome his fear by learning to swim in order to conquer his fear of water. The second heading that says sense of panic and first attempt. William Douglas makes it clear to the reader the sense of panic that gripped him as he almost drowned. He does so poignantly by reporting it through the eyes of a child who had experienced the terrifying episode. He recalled being thrown into the pool by a big and strong boy of about 18. Douglas decided to take a big leap and come to the surface, lie flat on it, and paddle to the edge of the pool. To the child, the 9 feet depth of the pool seemed more like 90. Even before he had landed at the bottom of the pool in a sitting position, he was swallowing water, and his lungs were ready to burst. Gathering all his strength, he tried to jump, but came up slowly. He could see and feel nothing but water. He was both terrified and suffocated, and hence could not scream. He thrashed his legs, but slowly sank again to the bottom of the pool. Douglas' second attempt. Douglas's second attempt to come out of the pool failed, as he sank to the bottom of the pool. The 9 feet seemed like 90 that we discussed already. Before he touched the bottom of the pool, his lungs were ready to burst. Although Douglas mustered up all his strength and courage and made a spring upwards, but it was of no use. On his way up, he saw nothing but dirty yellow water. He tried to latch on to something, but he was surrounded by water, and there was nothing to hold. He felt suffocated, he could not scream even. As he reached up, his eyes and nose were out of the surface of the water, but his mouth was still below the surface. His legs hung like dead weights, and he felt paralyzed. And soon he sank back to the bottom of the pool. The third episode. When Douglas went down the third time, he remembered very little of it later. He saw nothing but dark water all around. It terrified him. Screams froze in his throat. He felt lifeless, and the only sign of life was his beating heart and the pounding in his head. Though he was determined to push himself up when he hit the bottom, but it made no difference. He lost all hope around that time. He shook and trembled with fright, and his limbs were paralyzed. When he regained his memory next, he was lying on his stomach and vomiting. He overheard the boy who pushed him into the water claim that he was only fooling around. Douglas also heard someone say that he had almost died. He was carried into the locker room. The instructor's role. Douglas's instructor helped build him as a swimmer. He did this bit by bit, step after step. Douglas practiced with him 5 days a week, for an hour each day. Each day, the instructor put a belt around his waist, attached to a rope that was strung through a pulley on an overhead cable, and he held on to the other end of the rope as Douglas swam. Initially, each time the instructor relaxed his hold, the old terror returned. However, after 3 months, the tension began to ease. The instructor also taught him to put his face under water and exhale, and to raise his nose and inhale till he had eventually learned to put his head under water. His instructor held him at the side of the pool and had him kick with his legs in water. The stiffness of the legs gradually relaxed, and finally he could command a use over them. Thus, piece by piece, bit by bit, step after step, the instructor built him into a swimmer. Dissatisfaction even after training. The instructor was satisfied once Douglas learned to swim, but Douglas still had his apprehensions. He wondered if he would be terror-stricken when he was alone in the pool. He tried swimming the length of the pool, but was still terrified. He went to Lake Wentworth in New Hampshire, and he also dived off a dock at Triggs Island. He swam 2 miles across the lake to Stampact Island. In the middle of the lake, he put his face under water. Although he was very scared, he swam on. It was when he dived into the warm lake and was able to swim across that he shouted with joy at having conquered his fear of water. Recalling the experience of terror. Douglas, as an adult, recounted a childhood experience of terror and how he conquered it. He not only learned to swim, but conquered his fear of water and enjoyed the water sports that he always wanted to do. He was terrified because of two unpleasant experiences of childhood. Those had led him to steer clear of water. But he finally managed to overcome his fear and swam like Doug Corporon, you may say. He was overjoyed at having conquered a crippling fear of water. Douglas feels that fear is not peaceful. He had experienced both the sensation of dying and the terror it produced. He realized that the richness of life is found in adventure. According to him, adventure develops self reliance and independence. It makes you strong. It makes you another person, the better version of the self. Unlike fear that confined and limited the scope. Fear leaves a small and narrow world to explore that is opened up only when one conquers it. And the last header, key to cause of fear is same as the key to conquer it. That means the realization or the self-realization. Douglas, who is a narrator of the story because the self-experience, he had been scared of water as a boy, and as a child he was terrified of getting into the water. In his attempt to overcome his fear, he tried to learn swimming, and at YMCA, he was hurled into the deepest part of the pool by a strong big boy. He was almost drowned, in fact, would have died. And thereafter, he lived a life of overwhelming fear of water. He was so petrified that the sight of water made him sick. Consequently, he lost out on various water sports like fishing, canoeing, swimming, but he decided to overcome the constricting dread and with grit and determination. He found an instructor who trained him to swim bit by bit. He successfully overcame his fear and actually felt liberated. He put his grit and determination to the test, and he passed this test. The experience of overcoming his fear of water was life-changing for the narrator. An assignment followed. Question number 1 that you have to answer in about 250 words. That says, all we have to fear is the fear itself. So have you ever had a fear that you have now overcome? You need to write a struggle and the experience in detail. You can begin with this line, that's a compulsion. At last, I felt released or free or enfranchised. So when so? And the next question that says, how did Douglas overcome his fear of water? That's a short answer question. Followed by, what was the misadventure happened at Young Men's Christian Association pool? That's all about the chapter and the story. If you have any queries, any question, you can write in the comment tab. If you want me to go back to explain any other topic as well, not only the story, you can always write in the comment tab. Please do complete your assignments. There's a dire need of time as well. This is the end of the lesson. Thank you everyone. Wish you happy learning. Take care of yourself and your family very well.